Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. You have joined the seventh session in the free webinar series I have launched for this year, and we are focusing today on date labels. How are we interpreting date labels, and how will we move forward in terms of looking at our food items and knowing which one or what date is applicable to our needs. Now, the title of our session for today is Decode the Date, Understanding Expiry Best Before Use by Labels. Now, the objectives of today's webinar is I'm hoping that you'll be able to explain common food date labels. You will be able to distinguish between food safety and food quality, make informed decisions about food use and disposal, and reduce unnecessary food waste. I'm not sure how many of you are aware that the Sustainable Development Goal 12 that was developed by the United Nations actually focuses on responsible food consumption and production. And of course, the primary focus of that goal is, of course, to reduce food waste. And of course, in reducing food waste, one of the positives or the benefit is improving food security. So if we know what date or product or what our date labels mean, it means that we will not unnecessarily throw away food. And the last objective is that we will store food safely to maintain quality and safety. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Alison Richards. I am an experienced food safety professional with over 15 years experience in the food industry, and in particular, food safety regulation, policy, and standard development. I am also a certified trainer. I am a food safety columnist for the Jamaica Observer, where I write a column or an article every Thursday for the paper. I'm also the founder of the Food Safety Girl platform. I'm not sure if you may have come across my content where I share food safety insights, news, updates across my TikTok, Facebook, Instagram accounts. And I'm also the chapter director for Women in Food Safety Caribbean, which is a nonprofit US-based organization that focuses on building a community for women in food safety, or in our quality rather. Now, why are we talking about date codes? We're looking at food waste, which I spoke about earlier, right? We want to reduce food waste. We're talking about unnecessary product disposal. So if we have food products that we're not aware or we're not able to interpret these date codes properly, it means that we will dispose of them unnecessarily. Another reason we're talking about it is to reduce consumer confusion, right? And of course, regulatory compliance is such a critical part, because without compliance with our regulations and our laws, it really doesn't make sense for us to be in accordance. The rules are there for a particular reason. And having been an inspector for quite some time, that was such an important discussion I would have with my clients all the time, in terms of what date code are we using? Are we using a best before versus an expiration? At what point do you add your best, or what date? Is it the date that you're packaging, you're adding your date coders, or the date that you actually made the product? So those are some very important things. And of course, all of this discussion is important because the ultimate aim is to reduce food safety risks. Now we're going to be looking at 4 date codes today. And I've selected these 4 date codes because one, they are the most frequently used one, and 2, they are often confused by consumers and, of course, manufacturers and processors based on my experience being an inspector. So we're going to be looking at the expiry date, the best before, the use by, and the sell by. Now, just a quick overview of what these really mean. What do they mean for consumers? Or are they intended for consumers to understand? So for expiry date, it's all across the board. For consumers, it is important. For retailers, it is needed, and it is safety related. Now, your best before for consumers and retailers, this is important and should be used, and it is usually a quality date, a quality indicator, or used by for consumers and retailers, and it is often safety related. And we'll get into it a bit from now. And for sell by, it is primarily for retailers, and we'll get into why in a bit. Now, the first one, your expiry date, right? So this is the last date the product should be consumed, and it is often linked to safety. Now, for an expiration date, a lot of persons tend to confuse it with the best before date. So the expiration date is the manufacturer telling you that after this date, you should not consume the product. And if you consume it, then I am not liable for anything that may occur. Expiration dates are usually developed based on shelf life studies. So they would usually, and what really does happen in a lab-based setting is that the product is left for at intervals. So you made probably 10 buns today, and each bun is going to be left or monitored for a period. So each day they're checking to see at what day that bun starts exhibiting any signs of probably any mold growth, right? And that is usually how the expiration date is usually developed. Now, a key reminder, it is linked to safety, right? So because it is linked to safety and our infants or babies are primarily disposed to illnesses, their immune systems are not yet developed, it means that products like infant formula will come with an expiration date. You'll never see a best before date on an infant formula because it means that we're not playing with our babies. Once this date comes around, you should not be consuming. It is often also found on pharmaceutical products, so your medication, right? Your cough medicine, those usually come with expiry dates. Now, selling products after the expiry date may violate regulations. Per our local standards, like our JS36 and our public health standards, it does speak to food manufacturers and distributors having products past the date of sale. So that is actually, once you have products being sold past the expiration date, that is actually an illegal practice. And all of us would be familiar with the black market currently going on downtown, where that is where people tend to go to make best financial gains off of our expired products. However, remembering that the manufacturer has indicated this date because after this date, they are not liable. So it is wise and prudent for us to always bear that in mind. Now, our best before date. This is the date where the manufacturer is telling you that they can guarantee that past this date, it's saying that just as the name suggests, the food is best before this date. So they're telling you that before this date, I can guarantee that the quality of the food is top notch, right? After this date, the product may still be safe afterwards. However, the texture, the flavor, the appearance may. And some examples of these types of products that you may see at best before date on are your canned goods, right? Your crackers, your rice, your cereal, your pasta. Most food items will carry a best before date. Some will carry an expiration date, and that will be on the onus would be on the manufacturer. They just don't want the liability. So they're telling you, just to be safe, do not eat the product after this date. Now, the use by date. This is often linked to perishability, right? So you may see this on your milk or perishable items like your ready-to-eat foods, your chilled products, your freshly prepared food. So, for example, some of us may be going through the departure lounge in an airport, and you will notice that they will have the sandwiches, the pre-made sandwiches and stuff like that. Those tend to come with a use-by date, or they can come with a use-by date. And this is really just telling consumers that the food is guaranteed best if you use it by this date, right? Now, the use-by date indicates a period for safe use under stated conditions, and it must be followed carefully. Our sell-by date. This tells the retailer, this is an internal date that is used often by our supermarkets, right? So the supermarket has a sell-by date because it's indicating to the staff, the persons who monitor the shelves, our merchandisers, how long the product should remain on display for sale. For example, you may have supermarkets that prepare a soup or salad, right? So they have a sell-by date, or even the cake slices. So you may see a sell-by date on this because what happens is that the bakery will bake the products. However, the persons who monitor the shelves might not be the persons from the bakery, and nobody really keeps tabs on which product went out when. So the sell-by date is usually indicative of how long the product should remain on the display. So once the sell-by date has passed, it means that it will be removed from sale. This also sometimes is applied to our fresh produce in the supermarket, right? So you package your fresh produce, and after a while they might not look so hot. Some stores may implement a sell-by date. Now, the sell-by date also tells the retailer when the stock should be rotated and when inventory should be removed from shelves, right? It is primarily an inventory management tool. An important note is that a product reaching its sell-by date does not automatically mean it is unsafe to consume. All right, so we're now going to move on to date labels versus food safety because we've just recapped the four major date labels. Let's look at them in perspective of food safety. Now, date labels do not tell you if a food was temperature abused, if a package was damaged, or if a contamination occurred. Neither does it tell you if food was stored correctly. Now, for example, a product before its expiration date can still be unsafe if improperly stored. So what this is saying is that even though you're looking at your date labels, it is also important to pay attention to other factors that may affect your product, namely temperature maintenance. If it's a cold product, how are we storing that product? Are we making sure that it's outside of the danger zone, which is 5 degrees to 60 degrees Celsius? If the packaging is damaged, it really defeats the purpose whether or not this product is expired or not, because it means that the product is now compromised, especially for vacuum sealed meat products, right? If the product is contaminated, it really doesn't matter. For example, just yesterday, someone reached out to me via my Instagram and sent a photo of hot dog rolls that obviously had mold on it. And, it wasn't green mold or the usual dark color mold. It was actually white. It looked like snow. And they were asking, if they can cut off a piece of it. So even though the bag was sealed, even though the date did not, the expiry date or the best before date had not reached yet, the product clearly was contaminated and was showing signs of. So that is why it's important to not only pay attention to the date label, but also to what's happening with the product, right? And it also doesn't tell you if the food was stored correctly. For example, during Hurricane Melissa, we would have seen where supermarkets got flooded out. You would have seen where persons would have had access to food items, especially canned goods, that would have been dispersed in flood waters. That is incorrect storage, and the recommendation would have been that you do not eat that food item because it was exposed to dirty flood waters, right? Now, when we look at food quality or date labels versus food quality, it's very important for us to understand quality changes. And when I talk about quality changes, I'm referring to color changes or texture changes, flavor, and nutritional changes. Now, let's look at each of them. So, our color changes. Our color is often the first thing a consumer notices, right? We're going to somewhere, we're buying something, and if it don't look so bright, if it don't look, so hot, we're not gonna go for it, right? And that is because over time, foods may fade in color, they may darken, they may lose brightness, and they may also develop slight discoloration. And a change in color does not automatically mean that food is unsafe, right? That is a quality issue. So even though it don't look hot, and even now, another example of this would be, it's not date label related, but with the current ban that the FDA is undergoing in terms of removing or banning certain synthetic dyes that we use in foods. Those are the dyes that really give food that bright color. Titanium dioxide, for example, it's a white powder that is used in our Skittles or candy. So it's coating the candy, and then that is when they add the dye and it brightens that color. Now, with the ban of certain synthetic dyes and they're moving more towards natural dyes, one of the drawbacks, not in a healthy way, but in terms of a consumerism, is that the product does not look as bright anymore. It looks dull, right? So that is one of the quality issue, because of course that will determine whether or not the consumer, if you want to buy something that is cherry and it don't look so cherry, it look dark red, you tend not to want to, or you're questioning whether or not this is a safe product. Texture changes. Now, the texture often changes as products lose moisture or absorb moisture from the environment. Some examples of this, we've always had it. Or crackers, we have it in our pantry for too long. It tastes stale, right? It tastes soft and chewy. But before, it would have been crisp and crunchy. Also, our cookies, when it's just made, it has a firm texture. And of course, after some time, it has less crisp. Or breakfast cereal. This has happened to me before. I had breakfast cereal sitting on top of my fridge for so long, and then when you finally get around to it, it just tastes very chewy, right? So those are ways in which textures change when it comes on to our food items. Now, the product may still be safe to eat, but it no longer delivers the quality us as consumers expect. Flavor changes. The food flavors can weaken over time. A prime example is our soda, right? So we have soda sitting there for a while. It just doesn't taste as what do you call it, sparkly. And you can taste flat, right? Another example is coffee. Before it has a very strong aroma and flavor, after it has a flat taste. The same for tea. It may have a distinct flavor profile once you smell it or you brew it. However, after a while, it does taste less flavorful. You can barely taste the ginger in your ginger tea bag, right? And then we have our snack foods. Before it has a fresh flavor, and that cheesy taste that probably you'd have when you're tasting a cheesies, right? It can taste like the stale after. Now, the loss of flavor is one of the main reasons why manufacturers establish the best before date. So remember, our best before date is saying that the manufacturer is telling you that it is best you consume the food before this date, because after this date, I cannot guarantee that the quality is what it should be. So even though, and I wanted to interject this point, even though we're talking about quality versus food safety, best before dates are totally up to you. However, do bear in mind that things may be after a best before date and they don't appear to be stale. So you're eating it at your own risk, and that is why we're going to implement our God-given senses, right? We're looking on our eyes to look, taste it, smell it, feel it. But we want to always remember that we're not always able to see everything with the naked eye. So it might look fine. However, when the tests are done, it shows that there is some level of spoilage in the product. Now, the last changes we're going to look at is nutritional changes. Some nutrients naturally decline during storage. For example, our fruit juices, the vitamin C levels may decrease over time. We have our fortified cereals, certain vitamins may gradually decline as well. And our infant foods, nutrient stability is especially important. And this also applies to our canned products. So the longer those canned products go for, it means that it's not as, it's being soaked in brine, salt, and water. So over time, our ackee that is inside or whatever it is may start disintegrating. And of course, that does not provide the initial or intended nutritional value that the manufacturer projected, right? So a product may still be safe to eat, but may no longer provide the nutritional value originally intended. Now, what are some mistakes that I would normally see in inspections when it comes on to date labels? We have some persons using expired ingredients, right? So you have a storeroom there, and it's when you go through the walkthrough and you're looking around, you realize that you have flavors. Those are some of the common ingredients that tend to be expired and persons don't notice because you're not using such a high volume. So your flavorings, your colorings, those tend to be expired sometimes and persons don't know. It often lends to ingredients that are not used often, or you use it in smaller amounts, so the turnover time is not very rapid. Another mistake is poor stock rotation. So we're not practicing our FIFO and our FIFO, which we'll get into in a bit, right? So we're not keeping stock and we're not looking to see how best we're managing it. There's also missing date labels. You're seeing ingredients and you really have no idea. You have no idea when this ingredient was made, when it expires, when it was put into your inventory. And of course, if there's missing date labels, it means that you will not effectively be able to trace your products. And I love to talk about traceability because it's so important. And allow me to share this example. So you are making bread. You use flour, salt, yeast, right? Your yeast comes into inventory with no date label. You've made your bread goes out, consumers start complaining. You realize that it's time, you have to do a recall, right? However, when you collect the first few samples from the consumers who are complaining, you realize that there was an issue with the yeast, right? It could be that the breads were rock hard. They're not soft, right? So you start realizing that something went wrong with your yeast. So when you backtrack it now and you realize that this bread was made on the 10th of July. However, when you go back on your production records for that day, you're noticing that you had 2 shipments of yeast that you used. 2 different batches of yeast were used in your 10,000 breads that you made. There's no way for you to narrow down which of the 10,000 breads actually had the yeast that is giving the problem. So instead of being able to divide up that 10,000 into 5,000, remove from sale those 5,000 breads that were the affected yeast was used in, it means now that you will have to discard of the entire 10,000 loaves of bread, right? And of course, we're going back to food waste, right? So we're losing all of this effort, time, money that we've put into producing, and there's really nothing more to do about it because of missing date labels. So that is the importance of including date labels on your ingredients, and that is how you're able to trace it back to a single ingredient, and you're able to also conduct your root cause analysis. That is how you're going to know what went wrong. Was it how you stored your yeast, right? Was it the manufacturer of the yeast problem? Was it how they transported the yeast? So that is the importance of having that information available on your ingredients. Now, another mistake is employees misunderstanding best before dates, right? So they're sticking a best before date on a product that really should have an expiry date or a use by date or a sell by date. And what our employees not also understanding who or to whom these dates apply. So is your use by date or your sell by date speaking to your consumers? So for example, if you have a sell by system in your in the workplace, an employee who doesn't understand what sell by mean could simply mean that the person is thinking that is when the consumer buy to sell it back. That's what that date means. So they're not understanding that from an internal point of view, it should be pulled from sale before that. So it's very important that employees or if ourselves are working in these establishments that we do understand. And the final mistake I'll touch on is open foods with no secondary date marking. This is very popular. An example of this, you operate a wholesale and you buy 100 pound of flour, right? But you don't have space to house your 2 pound bags of flour on your shelf. So it means that you have opened your flour and you're repackaging it. However, you have not transferred the date label to this product. Something a bit more relatable. If you're going to the supermarket and you're buying your chicken, right? Your tray pack chicken. The manufacturer produces boxes of chicken, right? And they would have indicated on that their label going out that this date must be transferred. If the supermarket does not transfer the date that the manufacturer puts on the primary packaging, it means that they're communicating the wrong date to us as consumers. So are you transferring the date of when it was actually made, or are you transferring the date that you feel like you want to add to it as a supermarket because you don't want to lose the sale? So that is always a red flag that you would see in an inspection, because you're now wondering how well are you transferring the food safety parameters to the final product or your secondary packaging. Now let's look a bit at stock rotation. And two terms or systems that are often used in inventory taking or logistics is called FIFO or FIFO. Now FIFO is called first in, first out, while FIFO is called first expired, first out. FIFO, first in, first out, the items that come into stock first are sold or used first. It's kind of like first come, first serve, right? And that is commonly used on our supermarket shelves. So if our merchandiser comes today with, for example, canned sausage, right? Whatever they put out when they come this week, they're gonna push all of those, they're gonna push all of those towards the front and put the newer ones that they come with next week towards the back. And that is why I hear it from consumers all the time that they always reach around to the back to pick up the product from around the back, right? Because the chances are it has a longer best before date or expiration date. Now, FIFO, first expired, first out, the items that have the earliest expiry date are used or sold first, even if they arrived later. Right? So if you have yogurt and you received yogurt last week that expires in July, but I received yogurt today that expires at the end of June, even though I got it today, I got it last, I must sell it first because it expires before the one coming up in July. So that is the idea. So FIFO, first in, first out, focuses on selling the oldest inventory first, regardless of its expiration date. And FIFO, first expired, first out, prioritizes selling items with the shortest remaining shelf life first, minimizing the risk of spoilage and waste. Now, once opened, everything changes. Opening your food package starts a new clock. So fine, you've bought your product. You realize that your best before date is a year from now. However, all of that changes once you open the product. And your manufacturer date that your manufacturer puts on that product assumes an unopened package, right? So after opening, so many things happen. The risk of contamination increases, the shelf life changes, the storage requirements matter because all of the things that are in the environment outside are now having access to that food product. So that's why when you open canned products, you didn't have all of it. You remove the contents, put it in an airtight container, refrigerate it. That's why if our ketchup bottles or any sauces, it is shelf stable because it's pasteurized and it's vacuum sealed. It's airtight seal, it's hot filled, so it generates a seal. However, once you break that seal, it means that you'll always see that warning sign or a caution statement, refrigerate after opening. It's not because they want us to eat cold condiments. It's because what it does is reduces any bacterial activity that may be present in the food. Because we're having oxygen and all those aerosolized bacteria in the atmosphere. And some examples of this is milk or deli meats, sauces, and juice, as I mentioned earlier. Now, what responsibilities are there? I talk about food safety all the time, and I talk about who is responsible? What responsibility do we carry as stakeholders? And I'm going to look at 4 groups this morning: manufacturers, retailers, food service, and us as consumers. Now, our manufacturers determine shelf life. It is not on your retailers or the food safe or the consumers to determine when it's shelf life. I mean, granted, us Jamaicans will want to determine what the shelf life is. The seller said it's still good, man, they can eat it. However, the onus is on the manufacturer to determine shelf life. The manufacturer's responsibility is also to validate product safety, and they're doing this by doing their packaging analysis, their can seam analysis on their canned products. They're testing the integrity of their bags that they put their sealing their breads in, right? To ensure that there are no holes, the equipment is sealing the product properly. And of course, proper labeling. That is such a huge requirement because your label is how you communicate with your consumers. Because if I make some juice, I am not in all 10 supermarkets trying to explain to the consumer what is in the product, what they shouldn't eat, what allergen is in the product, how they must store it after. That is what your label really should be doing. Talking for the product itself, right? So it's telling you what is in the product, it's telling you where you can find me if you have a problem with your product or if you want more of the product. It's telling you what brand the product is, what which country it's made in, what date it was manufactured, what is the best before date. So you must be able to properly label your products as a food manufacturer. Now, the next stakeholder I want to focus on in terms of responsibilities are retailers. Now, your responsibility, and when I say retailers, I'm talking about your supermarkets, your shops, right? Your responsibility is to remove expired products, right? That is something that we see a lot of where we're going to the supermarket and we're seeing a lot of expired products on the shelf. However, as consumers, we can play a role in that. Just point it out to the store, right? Even though that's their primary responsibility. The other responsibility for the retailer is to also monitor stock rotation using the principles I spoke about just now, our FIFO and FIFO, right? So you're monitoring your stock rotation to ensure that you don't have any expired products around storage when the new ones them come, and it is like when you're doing stock taking a whole year after you realize that you've forgotten all of these products, because of course that increases food waste. The next stakeholder we're looking at is food service. This is our food handling establishments or restaurants, right? You want to make sure that you date your opened products. So for example, you ordered a huge bag of chicken from Bestress and you're only using 10 out of the bag, right? Or 10 piece of chicken out of the one package. You have to be able to tell when you open the products, right? Because that is how you're going to know when it's going to spoil, how you need to use it, and then it ties back into your stock rotation as well. And also following storage requirements. So if you open a huge can of cheese sauce, how are we storing it after? And it ties back to the manufacturers because that is where you're going to get the information from the label. But you have to ensure that you are following the storage requirements, especially if you're in a setting where you're probably repackaging. So, for example, you have a huge vat of salad dressing and you're making salads in food service and you're portioning it out into those smaller caps. How is it that you are maintaining storage requirements and how are you passing that off to your consumer? And the last group, consumers. Consumers are responsible for reading labels, storing their food properly, because storage just don't finish at the supermarket in or the retailer. How do you store it on your way home? What are you picking up first in the supermarket or last? Are you picking up all the meats first and then you walk around the store reducing the temperature and allowing things to get warm while you shop, and then after you leave the supermarket you stop down by Cheryl and you're down there for 3 hours talking and you have meat in the fridge or in your car just there defrosting. Those are all things you need to think about, right? So how do you store it during transportation and how do you store it when you get home? You're also checking your package integrity, right? Is it sealed properly? Are your cans dented? Is there any wetting on the label of the can? Because once the can label looks wet, it means that there is possibly some leaking. Is there rusting on the can? All of those things. If your deli meats and your processed meats are supposed to be vacuum sealed, are you seeing any air pockets inside there? It means that the package is compromised and it means that you're not going to buy that product. Following instructions, we spoke about that earlier. Are you refrigerating after you open? right? Are you transferring the product to another secondary packaging? And as I mentioned before, yes, we're using our God-given senses to smell and feel and touch. However, we do not rely only on smell. Honor your date codes. If you're not sure, it says when in doubt, throw it out. Now, I have a quick little activity for us to do. I have some photos, and I want you to tell me if this yogurt is safe to eat, right? So the yogurt was manufactured on the 11th of June, 2025, and it's 3 days past the use by date. Is this yogurt safe to eat? Feel free to open your mics or in the chat, you can put it there. Any takers?
Yes, it is safe to eat. It
It
might
is safe
lose
to
its
eat?
flavor or taste.
Okay, so right. So this is an advisement that you should use it by. However, it might not taste so hot. However, I would caution against yogurt, primarily because it already has a life culture inside, right? So you know once you eat it, that might be an issue. Peter is saying not safe, it's not best before. Totally right, Peter, yeah. All right, and was it Beverly who gave the answer? Who said was it
It's
Beverly?
Doreen.
Oh, it was
Doreen.
Doreen. Okay, thank you, Doreen. So the answer is that it's not safe. You don't want to eat that yogurt with a
Okay.
use by date. And if you do eat it, you're on your own, right? All right, next one. Red kidney beans in water. And this is 1 month past the best before. Can you eat it or no? Shania says no. Anyone else? Peter says yes,
Yes.
but for no dents. Saran says yes. Rajin says yes, but at your own risk. Medican JA says yes, you can eat it. So the correct answer is yes, you can eat it. However, remember the manufacturer is telling you that it is best to eat this red kidney beans before this date. So they're telling you that if you eat it and you're running belly, they are not responsible. Next one, we have turkey, oven roasted turkey breast sliced, deli meat, right? However, this deli meat has a use by date of the 10th of June and today is the 12th. Can you eat it? Peter Gay says no. Some strong no's coming up. Yes. Andrea says no. American says nope. Ida says no. Great. I love it, guys. And jasmine rice. Best before date is the 11th of December 2024, and today's date is the 24th of May. This is 6 months past the best before. Can you eat this rice? Natasha says no. Can you eat this jasmine rice that is 6 months past its best before? Peter says yes, no weevils or insects. Shania says yes.
Yes.
Yes, at your own risk. That is correct. So you can eat it, but you know you have to look out for the weevil them and it might taste a bit moldy. You know, sometimes rice when it's there for so long, it really does. It has lost its flavor. Remember, we talked about that, the quality, right? Losing its flavor. And it may actually affect the texture too. When you cook it, it might probably mushy or uneven, right? So all of those things for you to consider. And the last one, infant formula. Expiration date is the 3rd of June. And today's date is 11th of June. Is it safe? All right, hold on. We're seeing a question
Not
from
safe.
Park says, what if it's sealed? What if what is sealed?
Not safe.
The rice? So if the rice is sealed, it's the same principle that applies, right? But we're back to our infant formula. I'm hearing no
Not
baby
safe.
body can take it, not safe. We're definitely not taking that chance with our babies, right? And I'm not sure if all of you would have heard of the recent the huge infant formula recall just the other day in January, right? Where our infants they're under pressure, right? The cerulide that was in the infant formula that I think it unfortunately caused the deaths of a few babies. So those are some things that when it comes on to our babies, we definitely do not want to even risk it or think of it, right? And that's it. We're at the end of our webinar and it's the time for questions. Do you have any questions? I do know someone has sent me a message. They said for canned food, what is the duration that canned food should be used? And if the store gives you a near date, hold on, I think I'm not seeing everything here. If the store gives you a near date and expired date canned food, what should we do? You're meaning if like they bundle the canned items? Is that what you're referring to, Shanae?
Hello, good morning. You hear me?
Hi, Shanae.
Yes. So, no. For example, if they receive it from the supplier and give it to you, um, I don't want to give too much detail, but yes. What do you do
So
in
you're
that
saying
case?
if a supermarket receives expired goods and they're like forcing it onto the consumer,
Yes.
it's not
Um,
permitted. You're not supposed to sell. What should happen is that the retailer or the supermarket is supposed to return the item to the consumers shouldn't get involved in the because what usually happens is that you take things on this is a concession basis, so you take the products and whatever is sold. So from my experience in doing inspections in supermarkets, you usually have like a bad goods area. So once products are expired or they probably are damaged, the supermarket would not dispose of them until the merchandisers would come to verify that these are actually expired, and then it would kind of like undergo a write-off process. So they're not supposed to force it onto consumers. And as a consumer, you do have the right to reject purchasing the product. Because it's your money, remember you have the spending power, and that is why you are the most effective agents of change. Because if you don't buy it, it's not sold, right? And then our food industries or food service are then forced to make the changes that they need to. Right? Did that answer your question? All
for
right.
the most part, yes.
Okay. All right, so Ida, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name properly. It says, in terms of expiry, what if rice flour is kept in the fridge? Is it still good after the expiry date? What of dented cans within period for use? So your first part of your question, remember that rice and flour don't tend to come with an expiration date. They'll come with a best before date. So that means that product is best before this date. However, refrigeration does extend the shelf life of products, especially products like flour and rice. Once it's kept in an airtight container, no moisture gets in. So you would be able to chance using a product past the best before like rice and flour if it's kept in your refrigerator, because refrigeration and freezing does extend the shelf life of products. Your second question, what of dented cans within period of use? So the same principle applies. It might be, remember, we spoke about date labels versus food safety. So a product can still be within its date of use. However, we're looking at compromised, how intact is the packaging of the product, right? So that is something to consider. I hope that answers your question, Ida.
Um, Good morning. I have a question here.
Hi, good
We,
morning.
Doreen here.
Hi, Doreen.
A question going back to the bread on the shelf. What if you go to the supermarket and you purchase a bread?
Mm-hmm.
The expiry date is still intact, but as I said, the bread start to get a mold.
Mm-hmm.
You take it back, but they are referring to the expiry date, and you
Mm-hmm.
cannot get back your money, or you deal with that.
That should not happen. And I would encourage anybody to report it to the Consumers Affairs Commission. because it's the product is visibly not fit for consumption. So whether there's a date or not, and it's always important to remember that date labels are guidelines. So there's no hard and fast rule that the date is what you need to go by, right? And it also goes back to my experience as an inspector. I would go to some bakeries and they would batch, so they bake a whole bunch of, for example, say wine cake. And the products are then kept in bulk storage, so they don't individually package it out on the day. So, for example, they bake it on Monday, but they don't get around to packaging it until Tuesday. What some I would observe sometimes is that they don't put Monday's date on the product. They put Tuesday's or Wednesday's date on the product, the date when it actually reaches the final packaging, which you can understand is not an accurate date because that's not the date the product. And your shelf life is from the date of production or manufacture to the date that the product is expected to go bad. So that is why you would find in cases where, in your case, where you buy the bread starts molding before, but the date is not yet here. All right?
Thank you very much.
And Peter is asking if she can answer you. Yeah, man, sure. Go ahead, Peter. Yeah.
Hi, morning. Seeing that sometimes you can't get through from the supermarkets, you can reach out to the actual bakery and see if they would give you a refund or an exchange. Because sometimes the bakery is at fault and sometimes it's the storage conditions in some of the supermarkets or places. So some supermarkets or manufacturers will actually reach out and will do a refund.
Thank you so much, Peter, again.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? All right, so I'm going to invite you in the interim to have a look at my resources that I have here on screen. Next month's webinar, as I said at the beginning of today's webinar, that this is a monthly series for the entire year of 2026, where I will be hosting a free 1-hour webinar speaking on different food safety topics. So today we're talking about date labels, and next up, we're going to be talking about food safety for festivals and events. So, in Jamaica, food safety, or food events rather, food festivals are now an emerging thing. Every other day is a food festival. How can we protect ourselves as consumers? So many persons have reached out to me to say that, they went somewhere and they feel ill after eating. This is a very useful webinar to as consumers, what to look out for. And I would have written an article in the Observer a few weeks ago talking a bit more about this in length in terms of what are some things that vendors at food festivals can put in place and how consumers can protect themselves. And also today is Thursday, which means I have an article out in the Observer, and today I'm looking at food safety in aviation. So, it's summertime now, it's vacation time, we're all traveling through airports, airplanes. What are some food safety considerations we should take into play, and how can we protect ourselves? So you can feel free to check out that article. It's also available on my social media platforms. There's a link where you can access the actual document. So I want to thank you for listening today. And of course, you can always reach out to me via social media on Instagram, WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok. And you can also use the QR code on screen to access these platforms. I'm seeing another question. I believe there was another question. Oh no, not seeing any other. So if there are no further questions, I'm seeing some feedback in the chat. Thank you very much for your kind words. Candice finds it very informative. Peter is excited for the next webinar. I'm too. Can't wait to see you guys again. And of course, if you missed a part of this webinar, Ida, excellent presentation. Thank you. Enjoy it as well, Ida. If you missed any part of today's webinar, it will be available on my YouTube channel. The full recording will be made available on my YouTube channel later today. And for all those who registered to enter today's session, you will receive an email with a link to that recording. and also a link to register for the next session for next one. So if there's nothing else to share, thank you so much for joining me this morning. And I hope the session was an informative one and that you will also share it with your colleagues, your loved ones, and you have found it useful moving forward. All right, have a great Thursday. See you next month.
Thank you. Very informative.
You're welcome. Thank you as well for coming.
Great job as always.
Thank you.